Picture this. It's October 7th, 2007. Chicago was supposed to be perfect that morning. Cool fall air, a fast course, and one of the biggest marathons in the world. Every year, tens of thousands of runners flooded the city for the Chicago Marathon. By 2007, the race had ballooned to 35,000 registered participants. Elite runners, charity runners, first-timers, people who had trained for months just to stand at that starting line. And the city prepared for it, or so they thought. They had medical tents, ambulances, water stations, and emergency crews. But by mid-morning, things were already starting to go wrong. The temperature just kept climbing. Instead of cool October weather, Chicago was suddenly dealing with temperatures nearing 90 degrees, with humidity sitting over the course like a lid. Aid stations started struggling. Volunteers ran low on water. Runners were vomiting and collapsing on sidewalks. Medical tents began filling faster than expected, and then the ambulances started backing up. Race officials made a decision almost unheard of for a major marathon. They shut down the race. So they had to start getting everyone off the course. Volunteers tried waving runners off. Police redirected people, but people just kept running. Some argued with volunteers. Some climbed barriers. Some kept trying to reach the finish line while visibly weaving from exhaustion. And somehow, even with ambulances moving around them, many runners could not make themselves stop. Witnesses described it as total chaos. And by the end of the day, over 300 people would be admitted to hospital and one person would die. Hey everybody, and welcome to True Crime Culinary, the podcast that looks at strange intersection of food, history, crime, psychology, and culture. I'm Leah. I'm your host. And if you're on the tubes, you might be noticing I am wearing some athletic garb. Well, guess what? I love me a trail run. And although I am not an ultramarathoner, I am what you would call an ultra half marathoner, which is basically somewhere between someone who likes to run a half marathon and a full marathon and just doesn't want to have to explain it every time. But safe to say, more than 13 and less than 26 miles is still a fair amount of time in the pain cave. I prefer trail because I can handle about 4 or 5 hours of the pain cave on trail, but that number drops to about an hour on concrete. So although I have actually run 2 concrete marathons, I say no thank you please to any future concrete skedaddling. It's dirt and rocks for me, my friends. In a 4 to 5 hour pain cave event, or anything really over 90 minutes, a snack is always in order. So no brag, but this weekend I did not die on my 7-miler. So I'm getting closer to the point where I do actually need to start bringing food. I've got a half marathon coming up in, August? So I'm going to have to figure out how to stay hydrated and nutritioned for probably around 2.5, 3 hours. Gotta infuse those thunder thighs with something. Which got me thinking about today's topic. Did thou guess it, or perhaps even read the title? GU. The name implies something less akin to sports nutrition and more of what you might find in a petri dish, but we must persevere, because the history of endurance fuel is really the history of trying to convince the human body to keep going longer than it actually wants to go. So let us get a treat and start hiking up this historical trail. Okay, so for a long time, endurance athletes treated eating during exercise almost like cheating. They saw it as a weakness. And in the 1960s and 70s, marathon culture was built around toughness. Now, arguably, a certain perception of toughness. I'll just say that. Because there are other versions of toughness, historically speaking, in marathons. I will mention 3. The oldest, I would say, is Stamata Revithi in 1896, an Athenian woman who ran the marathon course in Greece one day after the men finished during the 1896 Summer Olympics, though her time was not officially recognized. Number 2, Marie-Louise Ledru in 1918, a French woman who is credited as the first woman to complete a marathon race during the Tour de Paris in 5 hours and 40 minutes. And before you sneeze at that, that is something like a 13-minute mile. To be on your feet for that long is no easy feat. I can speak from experience. And number 3, probably the one that most Americans know, Kathrine Switzer, the famous American runner who entered the Boston Marathon under her initials, hid in a bush, from what I read, at the start line, and during the run was physically assaulted by douche canoe men who could not handle, with their fragile egos, that she wanted to run this race and physically tried to stop her from finishing it. When I see toughness in marathon history, I see 3 badass women who probably had horrendous shoes during this event, were not supported in any way, shape, or form, and they finished. But that aside, the majority of men runners still were in a bit of a pickle because a lot of coaches believed drinking too much water would slow you down. Eating during races was also often discouraged because it was thought to give you an upset stomach, which, to be fair, I have a dodgy stomach and it resists food, unfortunately, during these peak moments when it would actually benefit it. So I can actually totally understand when the only real signals you're getting from eating during a race are maybe vomiting, diarrhea, or overall stomach cramps. But apart from trying to discern signals of the body, most of the time the goal was just to be disciplined, controlled, and suffering quietly. And honestly, that's a lot of endurance sports. It's kind of a weird relationship of accomplishment and suffering. I think if you talk to anyone who likes to do endurance sports, they have a funny way of describing it. I and my husband like to call it the pain cave. My friends and I call it type 2 fun. And I often have to resort to reminding myself that I chose to be here, but I will get myself donuts with my adult money afterwards. But even as someone ignores their bodily symptoms, at some point, your body physically gives out. And thus, we have the problem that athletes started running into something that you might hear called bonking or hitting the wall. I've also heard it referred to as like the refrigerator drops on your back, the piano drops on your back. It's just an overall sensation that you genuinely have nothing left. In marathon running, this tends to happen around mile 20, 21, and it's actually physiological. I want to say when I was doing my research, it kind of is that point where your body just runs out of fuel. So let me explain. This bonking or hitting a wall sounds kind of silly until it happens to you, which again, has happened to me. What's actually happening is glycogen depletion. Your body stores carbohydrates in muscles and the liver as glycogen, basically accessible fuel reserves. Depending on the athlete, those stores might total around 1,500 to 2,000 calories. Now, I'm picking on marathon running, but pick your poison. Could be swimming, could be hiking, could be cycling, whatevs. But marathon runners can burn roughly 100 calories per mile, which means you might need around 2,600 calories, this is again just like quick math, of carbohydrates. But that's more than your body can store. As I mentioned, other sports have this same problem. They usually have different ratios. I read Ironman athletes, which are triathletes that do a 3-mile swim, 100-mile bike ride, and a marathon at the end, may burn close to 10,000 calories in a single race, which is roughly 4 to 5 days of calories for the average person. So that's a lot of burritos. But for the typical human being, after about 90 minutes to 2 hours of sustained effort, the body starts running dangerously low on quick access fuel. And when that happens, everything starts to change. Your legs start to feel heavy, your thinking gets questionable, your movements slow down, and some runners describe it as feeling like someone unplugged them. By the 1970s, sports scientists were becoming increasingly interested in carbohydrate loading and glucose replacement during exercise. And slowly, endurance culture started changing from don't you dare eat anything to okay, maybe we should be eating the entire time. The question also became, yeah, but how do you eat while you're running? Because chewing while gasping for air turns out to be kind of miserable. Your blood is in your legs, so if you eat, the food you do manage to get down without choking on it can actually turn into a stomach ache because there's literally no blood or not enough blood in your stomach to process the food, not to mention your intestines, etc. But this is where California enters the chat. Because Northern California accidentally became almost the perfect place for endurance experimentation. No brag, but again, we have year-round training weather, mountains, coastline, counterculture, health, food, movements, university research, cycling culture, startup culture, like we got a lot going on over here, and enough affluent hobby athletes to invest in trying to make things better. So California basically became a giant outdoor human performance laboratory. Fact, modern mountain biking is deeply tied to Marin County in the 1970s as well, where riders like Gary Fisher and Joe Breeze modified cruiser bikes to race downhill fire roads around Mount Tamalpais. You can actually find these videos on the U of Tubes, and I have to say, like, basically pass. That looks terrifying, but, you know, hooray for current mountain biking insights. So at the same time as mountain biking, running boomed, triathlons emerged in Southern California. Fun fact, didn't know that the first Ironman launched in Hawaii in 1978. I don't know why. I don't know how old I thought it was, but seems relatively young. All it is to say, suddenly endurance sports weren't fringe anymore. A ton more people were interested, and all these people needed food. So in 1986, marathon runners Brian Maxwell and his girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Biddulph, launched PowerBar after cooking it up in their kitchen. The idea was simple: portable carbohydrates athletes could eat during endurance events. Now, when I started reading about PowerBar, I got ripped back into my childhood and was reminded that if you have ever tried to eat one of the early PowerBars, you probably saw it less as food and more as building material or its own sticky adventure. They were dense, they stuck to literally everything, and strangely chewy. I have memories from high school where I realized I never once got a power bar open smoothly. It was a tear and then it was an explosion. And then you just had to hope that that power bar stuck to the surprisingly resilient enclosure it used to house in, or it might like fly and stick on the wall. It might stick to your sports bag. I mean, good luck having a smooth exit strategy with that bar. But it was like one of the only things I could eat, or so I thought at the time. The flavor I liked most was, I think, apple. Chocolate was straight up chalk. Like, it was so disgusting. But I have also read that it was described as caramelized drywall, which makes me chortle but a smidgen. But again, at the time, it was tolerated and somewhat celebrated because it was calories and it was kind of perceived as an acceptable way to feed yourself on these long-ass pain cave adventures. They also seemed to work. The bars were engineered around maltodextrin and glucose polymers, carbohydrates that packed a lot of usable energy into something portable. And importantly, they were designed for function, not just pleasure. I'm going to go ahead and argue on the full function 10 out of 10 points. I don't think so because, again, physically getting it out of the wrapper was an adventure. But it was something that you could easily put in your pocket. You could put it in your backpack. It was easy to transport and shelf stable. There was also a sense of like, oh, this tastes like ass, it's got to be really good for me. But then there was another issue. The harder the athletes pushed, the less they wanted to chew. They wanted to be able to take in food faster. Because again, with a power bar, it's actually like relatively large. It's like probably the size of $1. So if you're really going on a marathon and you're trying to take in food, the last thing you want to do is deal with this fiddly wrapper. This thing flies out of your hand. You can't eat the whole thing because you're going to vomit. You're maybe taking a few bites. And then where are you going to put it? And then you got to eat it. It's just like a lot of sticky, lots and lots of stickiness. Plus, it's relatively dense. So again, the digestion was a bit of an issue. Your mouth also gets kind of dry. So breathing, we love that. Love that during an endurance activity. Gets more challenging the more you try to chew. So now people are like, I have to find something that doesn't involve chewing. Which brings us to Berkeley. In the early 1900s, biophysicist Dr. Bill Vaughan was trying to help his daughter Laura, an ultra runner, fuel herself during those long races. The problem wasn't just that she disliked food, which that's never a sentence I've said. It was the solid foods could become physically difficult. As I mentioned, no blood in the stomach, blah, blah, blah. Nausea, GI distress is always one of my favorite ways of describing getting the shits. Heavy stomach feeling, food gets stuck in your teeth, etc. So Vaughan started experimenting with concentrated carbohydrate gel. The result? GU, or I think it's officially called like GU Energy Labs. Tiny foil packets filled with fast carbohydrates, electrolytes, and, at times, caffeine. They're about 100 calories each, which to a degree was very helpful for athletes because you're often doing a lot of math. You're trying to drink the right amount of water, eat the right amount of food. You've probably dialed this in. For some of the more professional athletes, for sure, they are dialing in probably to the gram how much they're eating and drinking so they know exactly how much to bring and they know that their body can tolerate it while they're doing these like very intense races or workouts. So knowing something is exactly 100 calories is actually very helpful. Again, with the bar, you'd kind of eyeball it. Each of those packets also had 20 to 25 grams of carbs. The idea was you don't chew, you just swallow it and you keep moving. So endurance culture, like, aggressively embraced this. I remember just suddenly there were packets everywhere. I could not escape them. I was annoyed because you just couldn't escape the stickiness. It was just another format, because now you had the stickiness coming out of the top of this little satchel and you had no way of like kind of wrapping it up, and not to mention the trash. It was kind of like a phase where people thought that at races it was totally fine just to throw things everywhere, and then it became kind of a like pack it in, pack it out. Either way, let's just look at it as overall progress. P.S. I also hated the flavors. I only really liked vanilla. So let's get to the 1990s and the early 2000s. Athletes are being taught to fuel every 30 to 45 minutes during long races. Sports science kept refining glucose absorption, electrolytes, multiple carbohydrate transport systems, caffeine timing. What's not mentioned in here, which I think is often overlooked, is that everybody's different. Not everybody needs the same amount of fuel, the same type of fuel, or likes the same things, which can also affect these food fads. But modern elite endurance athletes can consume over 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour during competition, which is kind of incredible when you think about how recently athletes were being told not to eat at all. So endurance sports somehow evolved into people aggressively consuming flavored sugar paste while embracing any and all forms of spandex. But eventually athletes ran into another problem. After enough hours, you cannot fathom having to eat one or more of those damn gel packets. The ultra runners started talking about flavor fatigue, sweet fatigue, gel nausea. It's like putting toothpaste or condensed cough syrup in your mouth every half hour to 45 minutes. I genuinely, no thank you, please. I read that it is emotionally devastating sometimes to have to eat, and can relate. It also reminds me of a story where my parents got a soup maker, and at one point my stepmom just looked at me and she looked kind of sad, and she just goes, I really miss chewing. So slow endurance sports did a huge U-turn towards chewing again. Love that for us. But now they're like, we must make bebe between PowerBar and GU. What do we get? GU blocks, kind of like electrolyte-filled gummy bears in the shape of a square. They also started experimenting with other things like honey-based products, waffles, etc. Eventually, real food started creeping back into endurance culture. One of my buddies is notorious actually for bringing cookies and candy on runs, and I tip my hat to him. Having helped a friend do a 100-miler, there are points on those races where there's like a genuine restaurant, but it's like cup noodle, flat Coke, chips, pretzels, like things that are high in salt, that are very satisfying to eat and kind of make you feel better. Pickles, quesadillas, mashed potatoes, watermelon, grilled cheese. It is an absolute party because you're trying to get as many calories as you can in, ones that your body can handle. And also you don't want to like mentally fall apart because you're just having to eat baby food for 15 hours. And apart from just generally wanting to find any type of joy during these long races, psychologically chewing actually makes you feel better. Now, question overall, do these sports nutritions work in a scientific experimental scenario? I did find one study that specifically checked, I want to say it was like a bar versus raisins versus nothing. Now, no one in the history of endurance racing has said, please may I have raisins as my fuel. If you do reach for the raisins during your endurance activities, please email me at truecrimeculinary@gmail.com and tell me, when did you find this? And also, is that the only thing you eat? Does it get stuck in your teeth? I have a few questions. Regardless, the study did find that eating over not eating makes an improvement. Arguably, back to my see above point, there's so many other factors like your stomach, what you like, what makes you happy, what you're in the mood for. For women, what part of our cycle we're in, that probably dictate more of what you're going to eat than just like what's being marketed right now. But I will say having options is nice, and so it's good to experiment. This story started in Chicago, so let's go back to Chi-Town. Because on this race day, marathon runners are in a very strange psychological state. I mentioned that many resisted leaving the course, despite the fact that they were at risk of dying, as one person did. So why did they resist it? And that's because most marathon plans last between 16 to 20 weeks. Couch to marathon runners might do 20 weeks. Some could go up to 30 weeks. But many a runner has been running before that. Just for the 16 to 20 weeks, they're sticking to a specific plan to get as prepared as possible for this marathon. And they're probably running between 4 and 6 days per week, clocking anywhere from 20 to 50 or 60 miles per week. So they are fucking hustling. And to do that, you need to do early runs, weekly long runs, battle injuries, be careful about your nutrition, perhaps find a lover or some friends to complete the training with. And then you've built yourself up to running maximum miles. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe I get here. The race is in but a week or two. And you hit taper week. And my God, you might think that taper weeks are fun, but they suck ass. You've gotten so fit. You are ready to expend all this energy, and now you basically can't. Your body is recovering, and it's like gathering all of the resources it's going to need on maximum pain race day. But that means that you're not sleeping well, you feel cranky, you're kind of twitchy. And so when race day comes, you are like, please, like it has been such a buildup. I just want to be done with this. And you're kind of ready to explode. And then it's also like race day itself is so exciting. It's so fun. Everybody's in a good mood. Just lots of people doing like nervous poos. And then they've got outfits. And then we're just ready to go. And you're like, wow, I made it. I mean, it is truly magical. As much as I call it a pain cave, like there's a huge rush that you get. And it's very fun. But then imagine after months of training and being positively bedeviled with miles, etc., you're being told halfway through your race you can't continue. As humans, we have an exceptionally hard time making sunk cost decisions. It just feels like, no, I must do this even if I die. Which means that when officials in Chicago started telling runners to stop, many runners, their brains just went straight to, this is a loss. Not, this is a safe decision, but I'm going to lose out on all the training I did. I'm going to lose my identity. I'm going to lose all my sacrifices. I'm going to lose out on that finish line vibe. And the sunk cost became overwhelming. And that's the strange thing about endurance sports. For all the science, electrolyte calculations, engineered gels, glucose systems, and perfectly timed carbohydrate intake, there's nothing like the reward of getting across that finish line and the ability to hit your own goal, whatever that might be. And also for the record, I don't diss on distance. If 1 mile is your ultramarathon, fucking kudos. High five through the screen, through the microphone. You're a badass. Keep going. But make sure you have a good snack with you. That's it for this week. See you next week. Until next time, stay curious and be careful what's in your cup. Check out our show notes for sources, hit that subscribe button, rate and review the podcast anywhere you listen.